Agus Tomid Arash Shishomra, you're very welcome back to the room. Agus Tomid Anish Fechant Ba. We're going to look at cows for a little bit as we get an insight from Clive Bright, who's a farmer from up the road in Ballymote in Sligo. I want to leave him to discuss with you this unique brand he's got of his beef, his unique way of rearing them, and his way of engaging with the community. So let's go straight to Clive Bright. Fights off, Clive.
Hey, thanks, Moncon. And thank you to Nats for inviting me to speak. The caliber of speaker at this conference is getting higher and higher every year, and I feel slightly out of my depth, but I'll wing it anyway. I also want to thank Moncon because I put him under pressure, and we're going to interact a little bit during my talk. He's going to help me out a bit. So I'm going to talk about, I've always kind of been an advocate of holistic management. First of all, I'm a beef farmer. We're organic beef, and we're 100% grass-fed. And I've been farming for about 20 years, and I found when I started farming that it was always a bit of a kind of you end up getting knotted into the daily events, and it's very difficult to see the whole or see where you want the farm to go. And I always struggled with that, and I found when we converted to organic about 8-9 years ago that it filtered out a lot of the noise, and because without the kind of arsenal of agrichemicals, it kind of took away a lot of the prescriptive kind of solutions to problems. So we had to dig down a bit deeper and get to the core problems within things. And at the same time, to manage my grazing and keep the productivity high enough, I kind of discovered holistic management at the same time. And I explored that for years, and it was only earlier this year through Notts that did some formal training with 3LM, who were the savoury hub for Ireland and the UK. And that kind of really pulled everything together for me. And holistic management, and before that it was kind of mob grazing really, which is slightly different. That kept my pastures going and kept my productivity quite high. And what I really want to talk about today are some fundamental things, because we can get really caught up in the advancements of cutting-edge science, and it's vital stuff, and it's brilliant, and it's inspiring, but it's often very hard to translate that back to the farm again. So Albert Howard was a pioneer and figure in the organic movement, and the core concept was farming in nature's image. And loads of organic farmers will say they farm in nature's image, and it's kind of becomes this cliche. And but I think it's a really kind of poignant statement. And I think if we keep stripping back to that and keep actually thinking deeply about that and asking ourselves, is every farming practice that we're actually doing, is that farming in nature's image? And it's quite difficult to sometimes move away from the way we've always done things, or even question those things to check if they're farming in nature's image. And a good way to kind of step back and get a kind of overall kind of vision of where a farm needs to be going, and where how we can push it towards this farming in nature's image idea is if we look at photosynthesis. So if you maximize the leaf area for as long as possible and increase solar capture, and it's something we've all learned in like junior cert science or whatever. It's a very simple idea, but how often do we actually think about, are we maximizing the photosynthetic potential of our farm or our land? Because if we strip it back, like photosynthesis is the source of all profit. Like everything goes back to photosynthesis. It's the trigger point for all mineral cycle and all carbon sequestration and all that and it's the fuel for life on the farm. And if we think, plants are the conduit between the energy source of the sun, which is our free energy source, and our biggest resource, which is soil, our land. And it's the conduit between those two things, but it's also the thing that we have influence over. So we can photosynthesize more, or we can stifle that through various practices. So it's just a thing to stand back and think about. In holistic management, if you want to go a layer deeper, if you like, in holistic management, they have a thing called, there's a load of jargon in holistic management. It can be a bit confusing sometimes, but a thing called a holistic context. And basically, a holistic context is where I think I heard Zach talk about something similar yesterday, where you try and envision what you'd like your farm to be in the future, in 100 years, say, and how you'd like it, first of all, that it would be still there, that we still producing land, still growing stuff, and how it might cycle water, or how it might just grow food, and how you need to farm to get to that point, how you need to farm to leave your farm as a legacy to somebody else. And this is my holistic context as an example, and I'm going to talk through it a little bit. And so it's to leisurely, profitably, and perpetually farm, enriching an aesthetic landscape while producing the highest quality food. And it's a kind of, it's just a pretty statement, really, but like when it was 2 pages long, and it kind of got synthesized down into this. And I'm going to pick apart the keywords: leisurely, profitably, and perpetually, quickly. Like leisurely, I'm self-professed lazy farmer. I hate hardship. I love going on holidays. I hate being tied down by the farm. We used to do dairy farm. The first thing I did when I took over was sell the dairy cows. I just want an easy life and to make loads of money. This was quite a cool thing, in that when you farm in nature's image, nature does all the heavy lifting. And if there's hardship involved and you question that, you'll often come to the conclusion that you're not farming in nature's image. So like things like, just as a quick example there, I don't want to distract too much, but we breed very low input animals, and we've selected for them over the years. They do all their own work, they do all their own calving, they rear their own calves. I very rarely have to interact, and if I do have to interact, I sell them. I cull them out of the herd, and I keep this really, really easy, low-maintenance herd. And that kind of ethos through all the practices through the farm. So leisurely and being a lazy farmer is maybe a little bit flippant, but the core of it is that it's a mechanism for spotting hardship and going and questioning hardship, I suppose. Profitability, obvious in many ways, but I think a cool thing about the farm landscape is that at its best, it's this habitat. It's a really dynamic habitat, because it's a habitat for wildlife, it's a habitat for livestock, and it's a habitat for humans, and it must sustain them all. And humans in today's society need profit and need money to work most of the time, and so profit is part of the sustainability of humans. The perpetual thing is what I really want to talk about, I suppose, because nature in itself is perpetual. It works over, there's like a multitude of self-sustaining cycles within nature. If we think about, say, like the life cycle of a grass plant, or the life cycle of a tree, or a water molecule and its journey through the water cycle, or if you think of an atom, a mineral atom, say a calcium atom that was, and the mineral cycle is very cool because it crosses geological time, but it also crosses, minerals can cycle quite fast as well. So if you were to kind of do a mind experiment of a calcium atom on a sea creature that was in a prehistoric seed, falls to the sea floor, it becomes part of a limestone seabed, and billions of years pass, and you have tectonic shifts and rise and fall of sea level, and maybe a couple of ice ages. And next thing, this limestone bed is the bedrock of a field in Sligo. And some mycorrhizal fungi reaches down and kind of, with enzymes, mines that little calcium particle, brings it up into a dock plant. It becomes part of the building blocks of the cell of that dock plant. They get trampled into the soil by a cow, gets broken down by the microorganisms in the soil and the worms and the microarthropods, and gets broken down into that soil. Organic matter becomes humified, and it's taken up by a grass plant, eaten by the cow, goes into the muscle of the cow, goes into the muscle of our beef. And so it's such a dynamic process, but we can do that mind experiment over and over and over again in hundreds of permutations, just to give you an idea of just to check in if your mineral cycle is functioning, if it's working well, if it's part of the natural cycle. And that is kind of reinforced then. There's a range of ecosystem processes that you look at the ecosystem in holistic management, and you can use it to kind of understand the language of the land like a sage. And it's a very powerful tool. And for instance, that mineral cycle that I discussed, it passed from an animal to a plant, to the soil, to an animal, to a plant in a very short space of time, and that was all reliant on a functioning water cycle for the soil health to grow those plants. It was all reliant on the energy flow of the sun that we discussed earlier to capture the solar energy and grow those plants. So the ecosystem processes are all interlinked, and they're all the same thing, but they're broken into four so we can kind of analyze the weak points in our own system. So how do we get this into our daily farming practice? For me, being a beef farmer and a pasture manager, it's mostly about grass. And it's my easiest and quickest way to photosynthesize as much as possible. So if we look at the physiology of a grass plant, and it's often something that's, again, it's a fundamental biological process that everyone should know, and a lot of people do know, and it's often not adhered to. And by not understanding it and not putting that understanding into our practice, it's detrimental in many ways. So a grass plant is an amazing thing. It evolved with grazing animals. It grows from the base, so it renews itself from the base all the time. And in fact, it's not really healthy without grazing animals, because it has no mechanism to self-defoliate. So it needs grazing animals to defoliate. But the way it works is once it defoliates, it has this energy reserve in the crown or in the base, in the root, that once it's grazed, it uses that energy to regrow, because once it's grazed, the solar panels are gone, so it can't produce energy. So it uses this store to regrow, and with that regrowth, then it keeps on growing, creates more photosynthetic leaf, and that builds up that root reserve again. But if it's grazed in that stage, when it's starting to recover, or mid-recovery, the plant is taken down, and it has to regrow from a diminished root reserve. And if you keep doing that over and over, and you'll weaken and weaken the plant to the point where it can't regrow. And so the key thing for a farmer is there's two ways it's called overgrazing. If you graze, if you leave the animals in an area for too long, they'll stay there while the plant is regrowing, and they'll regraze it. The other thing is, if you go around in a rotation, you will, if you come around too quickly when it's in that mid stage, and you can overgraze that way too. So you have to time this rest period, and that's key. And it's such a difficult thing to do off the cuff, because you have your set amount of animals and your key focus is to feed those and get them to move on. But you also have your set amount of land that you have to manage, and the grass keeps changing its growth rate. So it's a very complex thing to manage carefully and make sure you don't overgraze. And holistic management, they have this mental looking thing called a grazing chart, and it's very cool and very powerful and a little bit complicated. But once you get into it, I completely rely on it now. So if you look down the left-hand side here, it's not a great one for demonstrating, but there's a list of words there. They're all my paddocks by name, and if you move along the line, every line vertical is a different day. And so you can, between the paddocks and those days, you can plot your grazing throughout the whole year. And what's very cool about it and what makes it holistic plan grazing is that on that chart you can plan in everything. You can plan in your herd tests, you can plan in your wife's birthday, you can plan in on the horizontal axis in individual paddocks that need special treatment. You can draw a line in there to plan what that is and reference it to something. If there's areas that are flooded at certain parts of the year, you don't want to graze at certain parts of the year, the silage and other areas are hay, you can mark all that in. So when you're planning your grazing, you can see all that in one page, and it's a really powerful thing. Now, just one of the cool side things, or the way it's designed, is there's a kind of an analog algorithm that you create, and it basically gives you the best amount of time based on the recovery period of the grass, if it's fast or slow, how long you should stay in each paddock. And I'm going to just quickly talk back. Each paddock has, in one column, has the acreage, and the next one you kind of you give the paddock a value of quality. So you just rate it in quality. And you multiply them and do some sums, and it figures out some stuff for you. So if you follow the maximum and minimum grazing, it'll actually divide up your grazing in a way that you'll definitely have your full recovery for the right time of year. And you can modify that as you go along. But this little sum ends up calculating something called an animal day per acre, and it's a funny kind of a way of equating the land, but it basically is an estimation of the grass you grow. And if you accumulate all those throughout the year, and each time you graze, you get the annual animal days per acre, and it's a really good metric for rating the quality of that paddock. And even though you use the area to calculate it, it ends up being about how much area or how many animals you could feed in that area for that year. And when I read Moncon's book, there's a really cool word that's almost the same thing. And if Moncon doesn't mind, I'd love if he'd describe it a little bit better.
Yes, so culpa is a piece of land, a measurement of land, but seen from the animal's perspective. So the size of a piece of land measured by its grazing potential. And it's described in that book, The Taylor and Anstey, that Eric Cross wrote in 1942, as the old style of reckoning for land, before the people got too bloody smart and educated, was the idea. But it's very specific. So it measures the grazing capacity of a piece of land. So one culpa is the grazing of one cow, or 2 heifers, or 6 sheep, or 12 goats, or 6 geese and a gander. Now, that depended around the county, but that was roughly what it was. So you have to think about it, that it's a term for a moment, you have to really think about this idea of culpa before it makes sense. But it's basically the human and the animal's relationship to a land, all encoded in a unit of measurement.
Cool, thanks, Moncon. So I'm going to quickly talk you through, there was one ecosystem process that I've kind of left out, and that was community dynamics. And it's something I kind of really came to light. I'd never really done it kind of engaged with it before this year and before I had the grazing chart. Because previously, when I was grazing, I'd focus very much, even though I had in mind this whole holistic idea and this whole recovery period, I'd also end up focusing on the day in question. I'd look at the paddock on that day and make sure, had I grazed out properly on that day, or had I got an even trample and did it look good? And I'd adjust the paddock size that accordingly to achieve this kind of visual effect that I was trying to create. So by having the overall plan, I was now kind of focused on the recovery period solely. So in spring turnout, we got on really well. Got a nice quick graze in and got it moved through. And by the time we came around for the second rotation, we had the grass had fully recovered and it timed it just well, even though the spring was dubious. And these are before and after shots of each recovery, looking off into the same distance and the same spot on the ground. And by the third rotation, I started to get a little bit dismayed, I suppose, because we had loads of grass. There was little bits gone to seed, but there was plenty of vegetative stuff. It was still high quality. But I was leaving loads behind, and the graze was really uneven. And I was going, oh, this is different. And like the inner farmer in me wanted to go out and top it all and even it out. And but I held back and I started thinking about this community dynamics idea. And community dynamics, what it's about diversity of all living organisms on the soil, so animals and plants and microorganisms and everything. But what it's more about than the actual diversity is about the kind of successional diversity within each species, so that there's young and old and animals that can reproduce or plants that can reproduce, so that there's the whole spectrum of plants. And what I found in this third rotation, by leaving everything behind, I had areas that were skinned to the ground and grey, and then there were areas that weren't touched. So I had this really uneven thing. And those bits that were skinned to the ground started tillering, and they had a kind of vegetative reproduction. And the bits that were left went to seed, and there was little seedy bits there. So there was a real resilience there in that sward. And if I topped it, and like if there was a drought or something, the whole thing would have gone into stagnation. So by leaving it like this, it had this real resilience in lots of ways. And when it came around again, it was fine. There was loads of grass. I had loads. It was quite even. But the coolest thing was 40 days later, when it came around again, the cows went into that field and they did exactly the opposite to what I thought they'd do. They went straight for the rougher grasses. They went straight for the seed heads, and they ate them first. And it was very cool. And from my understanding, these more mature leaves have all these secondary metabolites and the stuff with anti-inflammatory properties and all these things. So the cattle were actually able to self-select their diet, and it's a huge welfare thing that they have access to all this different stuff, and as a result, the nutrient density is going to be a lot higher in the beef as well. So so the whole idea of kind of embracing this community dynamics idea was very much about taking this lesson from nature that diversity and everything on every level, because I would have grazed that normally, or I would have tried to top it or keep it level or keep it neat like a lawn, but by allowing this little bit of wildness, this little bit of chaos, got all these extra benefits. And in those pastures, they were hopping with wildlife. There was loads of, I was tripping across meadow pipit nests. I know, I can just guess that the cuckoo got on well that year. The swallows were flying, the insects were going everywhere. There was frogs everywhere. I seen more raptors, and there was kestrels and sparrowhawks and all sorts of stuff. Just there was more abundance all around, and it was a very simple timing thing with my grazing. It was a tiny little tweak in my thing, and just holding back from having that kind of dominance to want to keep a neat thing, and just letting nature guide it. And just like Albert Howard was inspired by the woodland, and if we look at these pictures, these are kind of from the edge of a woodland where there's a lot of light getting into the base, and like every surface is green. There's leaves everywhere, and the shapes and the types of leaves are all different. They're all taking their little niche, and they're all getting to photosynthesize and cycle nutrients. So as another layer, Jim will be talking about this more, but as another layer, as well as this pasture thing, we can add another layer in trees quite quickly. And if we look at the idea of silvopasture through the 4 ecosystem processes, again, your photosynthesizing is increased because there's more energy flow, because there's more leaves. The roots are deeper. There's more fungal symbionts, and the minerals are cycling from deeper in the soil, pulling them up and dropping in leaf fall. And just as a point of reference, this was in the end of May this year, and the height of the grass was higher under these trees than it was anywhere on the farm. A big thing on my farm, anyways, which is quite wet and quite marginal, is this whole thing of correcting the water cycle, where the roots are alleviating compaction in the soil, and they're restructuring the soil. And if we look at this alder planted on the left, it completely corrected this rushy area, and the bit that I hadn't planted to the outside, which was slightly better soil, is still in this state of kind of stagnation and rush. And as well as that, the cows absolutely love it. Yeah, they browse on the trees, welfare, protection, cover, everything. There's so many advantages. So I wanted to kind of shoehorn in another word here, which I came across from Moncon, and it's this lovely word which I learned from a podcast that Moncon had called An Almanac of Ireland, and there was an episode called Pond Life that he did with Collie Ennis, and it was all based around this world. It triggered so much for me. It was just like this whole idea, and it was this really weird, obscure word. I'll pass it over to you, Moncon.
Yeah,
before I get too excited.
Forcamos. It's a word I've only seen in a book. I haven't seen it actually heard yet. I haven't heard it said to me. But it means two different things. It means either the unsteadiness of a stone about to fall or watchfulness. So for a person to develop forcamos is to develop this sense of watchfulness, or seeing nature and being attentive to it, to the constant poised potential for change that is in nature, that is in everything. But then to allow a place its own forcamos is to allow its impermanence and its unsteadiness, its chaos, as Clive was saying, to permit the freedom not to be neat, not to be perfect, but instead to be naturally messy and to be a bit uncertain, to be unsure, to gently wallow in this natural beauty, in this process of decay that all of life is constantly undergoing. So yeah, that's my definition of forcamos, Clive.
Thanks again, Moncon. Like, when I heard that word, it just kind of summed up everything I was thinking, everything I wanted the farm to be, and the future, and how I wanted to manage it. So I'm going to let Moncon sign us out here with this fantastic kind of blessing.
That's because you don't want to get in trouble, Clive, right, for saying those words. But Gomeg cock bo a gut gajo, no Gomeg cock bo a gwiv gajo, may you have cow dung forever. Because it was always known that if you had cow dung, that you had constant supply of milk, you had butter, you had cream, you had beef, you had even leather if you really needed it, and you had the cock bo itself, like a continuous fertility and continuous nutrition on your soil. So with that, I'm going to thank Clive Bright. We're going to take a 1 moment break, and literally it'll be 1 moment to bring Clive up on stage so that we can question the quiga, so that we can put some questions to him. See you in 1 minute. World through Clive Bright. So I'm fascinated to know what Sean and John would say. But first, John Brennan, who is obviously manager of Leitrim Organic Farmers Co-op.
Thank you, Mankan, and I really enjoyed the presentation there, because all the time when I'm looking at you, I'm looking at my own bit of land, I'm looking at my own farm. And one of the things that struck me was that we have always been conditioned to, top and be neat. And we've talked about the forecamus there and about this need to be able to accept the farm in a wilder state. My question is, how difficult is that push and pull inside of you, as it would be inside of me? And I'm asking the question that I've only topped once this year, and that was just simply as a weed control measure. I only did one topping, but just how difficult it is for you always to park the topper up as well.
Yeah, it's definitely something that's evolved, over time. But again, it's not so much about being prescriptive, going, will I top or will I not? It's more about analysing, should I top or should I not? And when you can answer those questions through, looking at the landscape through, say, the 4 ecosystem processes for yourself, then you get surety that way. So then you can decide. So that there may be some instances where I would need to top, where I was trying to target a weed at its weakest point that had overrun the place, and something like that. But but I think I've constantly get positive reinforcement from just edging into wildness a little bit, and it's not wildness. It's just partnering with nature rather than trying to control it.
Very good.
Sean?
Yeah, John's question is, because I talk to a lot of farmers, and sometimes when we get into the whole area of holistic management or even regenerative agriculture in livestock, something like what you're doing comes up. But often what you feel is, you'll hear this from another farmer and go, yeah, but I don't want to put my land like that. Because they have this perception, it's the golf course approach, nice clean fields. So that's one element of it. And I suppose John's kind of covered that now, but maybe you mentioned in your thing leisurely.
Yeah.
So leisurely and laziness was, I think, prime motivations for you.
Yeah.
So doing this approach, has this meant that you spend less time doing work?
Yeah. I spend a good bit of time thinking, drink a lot of coffee, and play with my grazing chart a good bit. That's good fun. But actually doing work, I've pretty much
an average day, for example.
Designed a lot of it out. An average day, there's obviously annual jobs like silage making and stuff, but an average day, about 20 minutes generally.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's it's very low input.
20 minutes of what?
Farming.
You're not being serious? No?
Yeah. All I do is move my cows. And maybe, there might be days I have to do fencing or catch up on stuff, but most days.
You're moving electric fencing?
Yeah, and we have a lot of fixed paddocks, but this year I had 74 paddocks. About half of those were fixed, so the rest were kind of they were drawn on a map. So every day I was moving into that paddock, I'd pull out the electric line, move the water trough, move the cows in, and the cows love moving. Obviously, they follow me everywhere, so it's all very easy management, low stress.
It's that idea again that Sean says, it is such it's such a brave thing for us to leave a buchlan bow or a thistle or anyone in case neighbours will look in and see that thing. And it's back to that idea of the male and female. The male does not like to do the brave thing and to go against the herd. But I'd love to put a question to the audience, and there's a roving mic. But before I do, and as you think if there is a question that you'd like to pose, there's a question from the internet that's coming from Janine Hazelhurst, who asked, do you measure the bricks levels on your pasture, the grass, weeds, flowers, clovers, etc., through the grazing year?
Yeah, I've done all that stuff in the past, and I have a microscope, and I used to look at the soil an awful lot, and I don't really do that anymore for several reasons. And one is I think I've calibrated my mind a little bit, not arrogantly, but you can see if something is healthy or not, and you can see a lot above ground. And I think it's very important to dig a hole every so often and check what's going on. But if grasses are stunted or you're growing flat plants, then or taprooted plants like docks and stuff that are coming in, it's a sign of compaction, it's a sign of calcium deficiency. And I have all those plants, but they're becoming less and less dominant now that, like I actually kind of like them in the pasture now. And because I know, like that little mind experiment, they're mining calcium for me, they're doing that thing, the animals are trampling. But like they're never this thing that's kind of dominant all over the pasture. I'm not worried about an infestation ever, because the recovery period of the grass is working so well that this kind of whole plethora of stuff is happening. So actually having those extra plants is just diversity without having to seed in fancy stuff from the seed merchant. And some of them are palatable and some of them aren't, and the ones that aren't get trampled, and some of them stand and they die in the frost. But there's so much kind of competition or symbiosis between all the plants, perhaps, that you just kind of get this even mix of plants and there's nothing dominating. So,
which is what you were saying with that beautiful summary, farming in nature's image.
Yeah, you're looking for those different leaf shapes. They're all photosynthesizing.
And that ties into a question from Peter Hobbs, who said, did you have a diverse pasture to start off with, or did you have to seed it into it?
We did a little bit of seeding in places kind of inspired by stuff that was going on, but the soil isn't good enough to plough. So we didn't do any ploughing, did a little bit of overseeding. Some of that took, some of that didn't. But what is dominating is just stuff that was in the soil that's coming back, or not dominating, but what's coming to the fore, I guess, is stuff that's thriving on a new management, new grazing management.
Mm-hmm. Was there a question from the audience? Those I see, John. Yeah, we're going to bring a microphone to you. In the meantime, did you, John, have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the next stage in the evolution of your farm. The next canopy that you're building with trees.
Yeah.
And how do you think that, do you think that that's going to sort of even bring additional benefits again that are not there now? What like if you were to take to look into the future and say 10 years with maybe agroforestry, where can you see that going, and what kind of benefits do you think will be there for the farm?
I can't wait. It's going to be brilliant, because there are areas on the farm that I think it'll take so long to recover with grazing. They're dominated by rushes from past management practices, and there's iron pans that the grasses and even the docks and stuff are struggling to get through. So they're improving, but improving really slowly. And I think trees are going to fast track all that, because trees are going to straight away break up that iron pan and start to create all this, like in that image where the water cycle was fixed, like fast tracked and fixed. And like I've tried to do that some areas mechanically, and they've kind of been hit and miss, and some of them have failed, and they're very expensive, and they're short term as well. They seem to close over and then the rushes come back, but the trees stay there. And there's just, like Jim will talk about it later, but there's this plethora of different advantages to having those trees there as well. And like that image of the grass at the end of May being the tallest underneath those trees, like if I can grow more grass by having more trees and all the other benefits that come with trees, then it's all going to be a benefit. And I think all these areas that are dominated by rush on the farm now, they'll become really, really valuable grazing to me. So I think I'll actually, the productivity is just going to keep going up.
Question.
Thanks, Clive. Great talk. Just a follow-on question from John's. Just at present, I mean, you've showed a vision for the future, how you could use silvopasture to break up you bring in new pasture. But just at present, how do you use silvopasture as a tool in your farm? Like, how do you integrate it into your grazing so that you can, for example, extend the length of the grazing season in autumn and keep it? Do you house animals at all? And keep animals out as long as possible.
Just what use and do you actually make of silvopasture positively throughout the farm and to the grazing year?
I don't have enough of it yet, but what I've really showed in the images are little pockets that were my eureka moments to move forward. So we have a lot of young trees planted, a lot of different types of systems planted, but going forward, yeah, I think they're going to bring my grazing to be year-round. We do house for a small period, and this year we've stretched that again, where we've housed half the animals and they'll be in for about 4 months, and the rest of the animals are going to be out year-round. And so I think, that's going to be one of the key uses for silvopasture in the future, is to create that extra resilience, create that extra soil percolation that we can stretch our grazing season.
Yeah, Sean?
Yeah, I was just going to get back to what you're talking about. And at the end of the day, it is about making money as well. So I know you have moved your average day to quite the 20 minutes, albeit there's other days that you have a little bit more. But if your system requires very much a managed grazing system, actually, Alan Williams referred to it as adaptive grazing, which is the same model as the Savory Institute. And I'm just wondering, if you took away all the fences and let the cattle free range for the year, because you've reduced your stocking rate.
A little bit.
But are you planning, is this almost like in a healing period you're in at the moment? Do you think that if you give it another year or two and you build up reserves and you manage that you'll be able to incrementally increase your stocking rate again?
Yeah, definitely. Like when I've reduced my stocking rate for a key reason, and that's because my pretty much my only expense at the moment is wintering. So it's housing the animals, providing bedding and making silage, and the costs of those, and the cost of having to run a tractor and the diesel and stuff for those. So I'm actually trying to design all that out, so I'll have no wintering costs. I'll be able to outwinter on standing grass, and I think silvopasture is going to be key to that, but also building up the resilience on all the pastures. And I think like healing stage is one way of looking at it, but it's just a stage on the journey to building up this resilience and soil function and all the ecosystem processes across the farm. So, like I really think in the next 10 years I'll have no tractor and I'll have no housing, and we'll be fully working off the natural capacity of the land then, and then I can start increasing livestock appropriately. The reason I destocked was to stretch my grazing season, and the sums added up by getting rid of those animals and having the very low cost of wintering this year. I'll actually increase my profit. So,
okay, but that is also based on the fact that you're direct selling.
Well,
or will it in a normal commercial scenario?
Yes and no. Before direct selling, I'm still not spending very much. Yeah. So my key point of profit is my lack of inputs.
Okay, and I'm going to ask one quick question, and this is just an observation more than anything else. If we look at international best practice in terms of holistic grazing, mob grazing, all these different, what are relatively new in an Irish concept is they all use hay. You don't hear much about silage except in Ireland. But do you see a difference, or is it just that our climate would hay be better in this situation if you could do it?
I personally like hay a lot better. It's brilliant when they're at pasture as well, and especially at that leafier stage at the end, if you want to supplement your animals that are outdoors even, because it has that fibrous element to balance off the standing grass. But environmentally it's always better. Even from the wildlife point of view, just taking that later cut and not taking an early cut of silage is hugely beneficial. We have loads of ground nesting birds, and like there was one year the last time I properly topped, I suppose, I was mowing through a field and I took a break, and it was the stupidest thing I ever did. I walked back up for lunch, and while I was walking by, I walked by a meadow pipit nest that was left in the bit I hadn't mowed. And I was like, oh, that's class. Can't believe that survived the grazing animals. Yeah. I hopped back into the tractor after lunch and finished mowing the field. And it was only afterwards I was kicking myself. And it was a real eureka moment. You're just like, such a stupid thing to do. And like, we do that all the time without thinking about it. Yeah.
We're going to take a 20-minute break, but before, I just want to point out, Sabina McKenna was asking about, how does one know, a consumer know that you can we rebrand beef that's grown this special way? But you have your Rare Ruminar brand, and you're big on social media, so you've created that brand for yourself.
Yeah, I have, and like, it works really well. It was more got to do with my thing of the kind of fluctuating market really frustrated me, and the whole gamble of putting meat into the market and never know when it's coming, and that's what kind of motivated me to direct sell in the first place.
And I'm just going to ask briefly again, because at BioFarm 2018, you mentioned how the drought had really affected you badly. So John G was asking, did this new system of holistic management help with that? And again, I'll just take a brief answer, because we're all going to go and get a break.
Yeah, sure. You're completely resilient to drought.
Really? That's not a problem anymore?
No.
Yeah. Clive Wright, thank you so much. We're all going to take this 20-minute break and come back. We'll see you there in 20 minutes to continue.